Right. And that's what's interesting with a lot of these college guys. A lot of them will never go on and play, just like the OHL. It's not different, but a lot of them will never go on to play any better level than this. And I'm watching this game like, wow, these guys are good. Wow, these guys are good. And they ain't going, like a lot of them, almost all of them are not going to be going anywhere.
Answer is most of them are going not nowhere. Most of them are not having a career in hockey. Some are.
Exactly. And they're unreal. All of them. It just like on their individual skill set. I always talk about this with respect to development. Like you need to be able to take your individual skills for granted so that you're not thinking about it and you can just play the game now and just worry about executing and to do the game part. None of these guys have to think about their passes. None of them have to think about their skating. None of them have to think about their puck handling, their shooting. Everybody rips it. Everybody can handle the puck. Everybody can skate. Everybody forechecks hard. Everybody backchecks hard. Everyone knows their assignments. It's amazing to watch how elite level these guys are while also knowing that they're not going to move on, you know?
So if you just think about that, okay, so the max is, I don't know if is that the age limit in U.S. college is 26?
26? I don't know that there's actually a rule on how old you can be. In Canada, like, you could, in theory, come back when you're 30 if you haven't already played your 4 or 5. Like you have 4 or 5 years of eligibility, and then that's all. So once you play that, you have to either change schools.
Or just from a development
whatever.
standpoint, like when people, this is something people should always think about. Like when we'll go in 10-year increments, right? 10 to 16. So that would be 10 to, you could be eligible for CHL at 16 years old. So think of the improvement you made in hockey. Like obviously, from not playing at all or very little to practicing and getting out on the ice, and then you practice a little bit more and you play games and you get a little bit older, a little bit stronger. Your reps get more, blah, blah, blah. You know, from 6 to 8, 8 to 10, there's huge improvements. 10 to 12, 14 to 16. Just think of that gap of how much you've improved. A lot of people get it when they are doing their development, they can kind of go, they can look at someone 3 years ahead of them and they go, man, I got a long way to go. Or can't imagine what their hockey could be. Because like, let's say they get to the OHL or CHL that first year and it's like, it's fast, it's hard. It's like, yeah, but it's like you're playing 4, sometimes 5 years older than you. You have to imagine, that's why you have to continue to do the work and understand that. If you take the 26-year-old college guy, that's another 10 years. That's another 10 years of development. So that's what I always try to explain to people. It's like, that's what I mean by being 13, 14, 15, 16 and saying, oh man, like my shot needs to get better. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Your shot needs to get better. You have 10 years to make it better. Like if you worked on shooting and different types of shooting and hiding the puck and all these different things and spent 10 years at it, you will have a good shot, right? You could be a better skater. That's why that development thing is, if you just put the time in for a long period of time, at some point everything comes to a head. And if you put the work in, you will be what you can be. And with that is the working out and getting stronger, right? So if you do that that's why the looking long term is really, really important when people are looking at what type of player they're going to be. It's really not what you are at 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. You know, there's a lot of kids that I always ask this question. Like it's amazing to me how, you know, I've said this probably several times on the podcast, how many kids could come out of the CHL never drafted, right? And they put up points. They were playing. You know, I'm not going to use their names right now. Well, I will. I'll say Logan Morrison, for example. How did he go through the OHL putting up points? So I'm like, what is his gap? He's his 4th year in the league. He played in overage, so underage, overage. So it's 5 years minus a COVID year. How did he not get drafted? He's putting up points. He plays. I don't see a problem with his skating. He competes. Like, what is it? And then he goes through the league, and then over his year, he signs with someone. It's like, okay, someone saw it. But it's amazing to me how someone didn't see it for such a long time. And there's like countless guys that end up going, you know?
Yeah, for sure. One thing I'm kind of thinking about too, how people don't realize how much time there actually is, because it feels like a rush, particularly in Ontario or in Canada, because 16 is your first real chance at getting a door open for you. And in out west, it's 15. It's the year even before that where they can get drafted, right? And it's funny. I was talking to a dad yesterday on one of these calls because they were talking to me about the academy, and I was saying to him, like, or well, I guess he kind of brought it up how, I know it's important that we pack all this stuff in because 16, it's a really important year and people are really trying to make sure their kids are ready for 16 and this kind of thing. And I was explaining to him with the academy model that we're looking at, it's like we're trying to make it so that people don't feel that. You don't feel like you have to be 100% ready at 16. And if you're not, you don't have a chance, and that's why the U18 program is there, because in the States, if your goal is to go to NCAA, you're not making a choice until you're 19 or 20 anyways, unless you're the exceptional underage kid that's a true freshman out of high school.
I was having a conversation with Mike Snee, he runs the College Hockey Inc. We were having that conversation because he was asking me about my kid. I said, yeah, because we're in Canada, like the OHL is where he's probably leaning. And I said, if most likely, whatever. He goes, I was just talking about the decision making, and he understood it all. He goes, it's so funny if you lived next door to me in Minnesota, he goes, you would not be thinking anything like that. You'd just be playing at the whatever level because you have so much time to make a different decision. And that's good and bad, like whatever. Like in Canada, this is mostly what we do, and it's great. It's awesome. But it's like what he was saying, to your point, was they have the North American League. They have U18, which is still a really good hockey. North American League, the USHL, they have different junior leagues. It's just a matter of continuing to play because they're all scouted, right? And so someone that's 16, it's not the end of the world at all.
And I like the idea that they get that opportunity early as well. That's not that that's a bad thing. But the negative part of it to me is when kids feel like it's over now because it didn't happen right when they're 16. That's what I was saying to this dad yesterday. I'm like, they're just starting to get into their growth, Now, one of the things that kind of masks it, I think, is if you look at yourself between 6 years old and 16 years old, the growth is so obvious, right? Because you're getting taller, you're getting bigger, you're becoming an adult, you're on track to be an adult. Around 18, let's say, you're probably not going to get too much taller for players. Would be for boys. Yeah, that'd be for boys. For girls, I think it'd be a little bit sooner than that. But for the guys at 18, okay, you don't really get much taller. So you could there could be an illusion there where you feel like, okay, 18, I'm kind of done. But now I'm showing you the roster, and it's like there's 26-year-olds on this team. There's 25-year-olds, 24-year-olds. That's still another 4 or 5 years that you can be developing where you hit your prime. Because it's the average age, like in the NHL, the average age of the player is now 23, 24, 25, something like that, right? Early mid 20s, I'd say. And for guys to say they're in their prime as a player, it's probably that 25
I think
that
I don't know 100%, but I've heard it a couple of times that the actual prime of a player is like 27, 28. That's when you kind of peak.
Interesting enough, because I was actually listening to Gary Roberts' podcast the other day, which, by the way, guys, if you want to listen to a good podcast about becoming a player, I was going to mention this to you, actually, I forgot. It was on Ben Pekulski's podcast, which is Muscle Intelligence podcast. He's a Canadian bodybuilder. He did a podcast with Gary Roberts just recently. What a podcast. Awesome listen. And he was talking about how the average age is getting younger.
That's what I was going to say, because guys, contracts.
Yes. So maybe that's true, but your prime still in terms of your body output, let's say it's mid-20s. So even at 18, when you're physically, maybe your growth has stopped in terms of your height, maybe even your weight, your body composition can change a lot. The amount of muscle to fat ratio can still change a lot. All of those things can still change, even though structurally your body could look similar when you're 18 as it does when you're 25. Like for me, when I was 18, I'm still the same height and about the same weight as when I was 18. Right now, I'm 29. So for all these guys, and if I could explain how much like way better shape I was in when I was in college at 20, what would have been 25 when I was my last year, 24 in my last year. So I'm 24 years old. I'm in way better shape than when I was 18. I'm way better at hockey than when I was 18. I can play and execute way better than when I was 18. But I'm physically about the same as when I was 18. So there's an illusion that the growth stops when it doesn't stop around that time. So it's important for people to understand, especially in Ontario, because we put so much emphasis on that 16-year-old year, that there's option beyond that, and there's a ton of development years that go on beyond that.
Yeah, and a lot of it comes down to ego, right? Like, and I get it. Like, obviously, you get it. You want to be the best 16-year-old. If you're gonna go, if you would like to play in the CHL, and you could get drafted first or top 5 picks, like that's awesome for the ego. That probably tells, maybe sends a message that look out, here comes a future NHLer, right? It sounds a lot better than being drafted in the 7th round or 9th, right? So, and no different than the NHL, right? If you're drafted in the 1st round or drafted at all, but if you're drafted in the first top 10 or something, it's like, okay, this kid's got a future, but a lot of things still can change, right? So, yeah, anyways.
One note too, this will be for people that always ask us about goalie stuff. Because again, just a caveat, I'm not a goalie. I know nothing about being a goalie, but I was having this conversation with a goalie yesterday because they were asking about what do they do their next few years. And for goalies, they're automatically on a later development track just because of the nature of their position. So there's only 2 goalies on a team, which is way less players. There's less goalies, people that want to be a goalie, which makes up for some of that. But there's only 2 spots on every team if you're a goalie. Those guys, on average, if you look at the average age of a goalie in the OHL, it's a few years older. So it's a few years older. So what I was saying to the goalie that I was talking to yesterday is, your starting years as a elite goalie, and you could probably speak to this in the OHL. Most starting goalies are in their 4th or overage year in the OHL, right? 3rd, 4th, or overage year.
Unless you're in Mississauga,
that's most of the
they
starters.
Got 2 young, unbelievable goalies. Unbelievable. Yeah, I know exceptions.
Okay, so
just
there's the exception, right?
There, you know.
Yeah. But for the most part, they're going to be 3rd, 4th, 5th year goalies as the starters.
When the organization actually trusts you, that you've backed up, or you played, maybe 15 to 20% of the games, or dressed, not even played that many, just dressed some and practiced a lot and got bigger, stronger, and got some coaching and stuff. Yeah, your first year you're going to get some, maybe. Second year you're probably still a backup goalie, and by your 18-year-old year, like draft eligible year, you could be a starter. You might not be, but you don't need to have 4 or 5. That's the same with a player. You don't need 4 or 5 really, really good years. You need a couple to say, okay, this kid could play now.
This is exactly my point. So the mindset of a goalie should be, and for some it's not, and this is what I was explaining to this player yesterday, is like, you're looking at, when you're 19, you want to be starting on a high-end junior team. That's what your goal should be if that's your goal. It's not, I should be starting now and I'm way behind and I'm no good because I'm not there yet and all this stuff, because it's just naturally different for goalies. So for a 16-year-old goalie who maybe they don't get drafted or whatever, it's like, yeah, you still have 3 more years that you could, before you need to kind of be somewhere that's important if you care about having a career in hockey. So the nature of the position, they already should be in that delayed mindset of 19 is kind of my year. Whereas players don't have that. They're thinking 16 is my year because that's the draft in Ontario. As you take 3 steps over the border, and they're in the 19-year-old mindset that the goalies have in Ontario, or should have, So I wanted to draw that comparison because I said this to the goalie I was talking to. I was saying it to his dad yesterday. And before the kid was there for the conversation, he's like, you need to tell my kid that, because I've never heard that before for goalies. And it's just like, yeah, man, you should know that. You should know that it doesn't have to be today, but it's the same message for players. It doesn't have to be today, even though it feels like it's 16. You have your 2-3 years before. It's really your last chance now to get somewhere. That's kind of 19-20. That's what it is. Your commitment year, or whatever, if school is of interest to you. So you have, instead of thinking of it as 16 is my chance, it's like I have multiple chances. I have 16 as a chance. That's an opportunity. Or 15 if you're out west. Then you have, when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, all of those years could be a chance to be seen for either an OHL team, because that happens, or for college.